what I always say is that every film, every book, every poem, every piece of music teaches me something, either how to do something well or how to do it badly, because there's a lot of bad art, but there's also a lot of great art. So I can't really say, that, maybe let's say Kurosawa, I find to be a great director, very, again, humanistic, um, just brilliant, beautiful cinematography. There's something so great in his work. Um, Somebody like Agnes Varda, who also does fiction and documentary, and in slightly different ways than the norm. Um, but there are just so many artists who I've learned from, you know, how to tell a story, how to be funny, how to make something visually interesting. There's endless possibilities of learning. Well, I would say I started in the avant-garde or experimental world because I didn't go to graduate school. I didn't study film, in school. And so when I was first living in New York, there was a place, the Millennium Film Workshop, and it was very cheap. You could get cameras and editing equipment. And there were a lot of filmmakers. And so I started going to the screenings and talking with the filmmakers. And so I started working in that way, because I didn't have the money to make a big narrative film. I was seeing a lot of the films of Fassbinder and Margareta von Trotta and, the sort of European art cinema, let's say. And I thought those were really fantastic films. And part of me wanted to make a film like that. But I had no money. So I could make short films. I could make Super 8, Um, and then, of course, over the years, that developed. Uh, and I think in terms of the festivals, well, you start small and then it gets bigger and bigger. You start at a little festival somewhere, and then after some years, you have more work and somebody does a retrospective, and you go to the Berlin Film Festival or Sundance, So I feel like I've experienced the biggest place and the smallest places, and they all have something interesting, Well, again, I think I started on the one hand working in this experimental way, and also because I had studied art. I studied art history and photography, and so I was very interested in the formal or the aesthetic questions. What is film? How do you work with film? But I also started in the late 1970s, and feminism was really big. And then, of course, the gay and lesbian movement was starting to be really big. And so it was sort of a combination of wanting to find ways to work with cinema that was continuing to develop the idea of cinema, let's say, like other people were at the same time, but also to express these ideas or tell these stories that were maybe a little provocative, that were about the bigger political situations, but told through personal experiences and, or people I know. Um, and why is that? I don't know, because I have always been political. I've always been aware of myself as a woman. I've always been aware of myself as a lesbian. I've always, as a white person, I mean, all these issues that, and they kind of go into the work. There is something called politics, there's being a senator or a president. I think that's a very different experience than being an artist. Um, and I think a lot of politicians would be bad artists and a lot of artists would be bad politicians. But I do think, in the early days of feminism, we said the personal is political. So what you experience in this very direct thing with somebody else is kind of a reflection of the bigger political world. Um, so in a way for me, I don't think it's possible to look at a personal thing, whether it's, my relationship with my father, with my girlfriend, with the Catholic Church, with developers in the city, without also thinking about the bigger aspects of it. It's not just my story, it's, the bigger story. I don't think, oh, I'm going to make this, to fight against the Hollywood studios. It's just that I think with film, you can do exactly what you want to do. Let's think about painters. You know, there are traditions in painting, but then you have a new generation and they think, well, I'm not going to do figurative art, I'm going to do abstract art, or I'm going to do conceptual art. People have new ideas as time goes along. And so I think also with film, we have this, very powerful thing like the studio system, and not just in America, in other countries. Um, but ever since the beginning of cinema, we've also had people working in other ways, and certainly people making documentaries, not just fiction films. So I think it's just it's an art form like any other, and as an individual, you make the film that you need to make or that you want to make because you want to, not because you're opposing that, but because that's what your voice is. In undergraduate school, I didn't go to graduate school. In undergraduate, I did art history and what they called studio art, but at my school, they didn't have film and they didn't have photography. So I did, I don't know, painting and sculpture and stuff. But I would say my main study was art history, which I think was very valuable, but I didn't want to become an art historian. I wanted to do photography and make films. Yeah. The first long film I made was The Ties That Bind, about my mother living in Germany during the war. And I had made a few short films before then, and they were kind of about personal experiences. And then I started thinking, I want to make a film about how women don't have a home. And it was this sort of theoretical thing, that women were talking about then, And I kept thinking, women don't have a home, don't have a place. And one day I thought, wait, that's my mother. She's, had to leave Germany, come to America. She felt very uncomfortable in America. So I went from this sort of theoretical, philosophical, political idea to my mother. And now what is her story? So I think that kind of happens a lot, that there's this bigger theory or idea, and then there's the specific experience that I had or somebody had that I talk about in the films. And I think if you're very specific, people always translate. I made a film called Rules of the Road, and it was about when I broke up with my girlfriend and about the car we had, right? And so the whole film, all you cars, 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 cars. And when I showed it, a friend of mine said, I call this my red shoe film, because when my girlfriend left me, anytime I would see anybody in red shoes, I would think it was her. And so I think people do that, and I do that if I'm watching a film that it might be about somebody living in Tasmania, a man in Tasmania. But if the story is powerful to me, then I translate it to myself. So I hope at least that if I do the same thing, people take it and translate it to their own, to make it meaningful for them. It's kind of interesting to be where I am now. I mean, I'm 69 years old. I've made 26 films or more, I don't know. And I would say at the beginning, I might have had a very clear idea of what I'm dealing with, and all of that. And it just changed over the years. Like each time I make a film, I would have to figure out a different structure for it. Will it be in color or black and white? Will I use my voice, somebody else? Each film creates its own questions and finds its own solutions. And I would say at the moment, I can't say what would be next. Uh, in a way, the most recent film I made called Today uh, has a very kind of open form that's quite different than all my other work. And I'm not so sure about that. And I don't know if the next thing would be more open or would suddenly become really structured in a way, the way older films were. It's very, I don't think I don't think you ever know what you're going to do next. And there are some artists who I think just do this one thing really well over and over and over again. Um, and I think other people wonder what they will do next. So I'm more like that. I would say it started just in a moment. I thought I have to be more aware of the good things in life. Maybe I'm too negative, too working too much. I should just go out in the world and see the world. And so I started going out with my camera and finding like nice things, yeah? And then my very good friend uh, had a brain tumor, and suddenly there was something very serious. Then my father, then my mother. And so as I was filming, I thought, no, no, no. It's more that the camera can record life, not 24 hours a day, but here I have my camera and oh, here's my father, he's dying. But then here's the circus, which is wonderful, except the circus is ending. So I just kept using the camera to just look at the world. And then I started putting it together, and I could only think of doing it sort of in order of time, not mixing things around, so that I could see the flow of the life at that over those years. And that's what it is. So it really started out of maybe a slightly different feeling than I usually would start a film. And even as I was working on it, I kept thinking, I don't know what this is. And now it is what it is. And maybe it's good, maybe it's not. I don't know. I think that the presence of social media and cameras in everybody's phone is has already had a profound effect, and I think it will continue to have a profound effect. And I have friends who are filmmakers, and I also say sometimes, why should we make films anymore? There's just too much media in the world. Why make more media? Which is sad, right? Because a lot of this media is just garbage, right? It's just go through it, scroll. But I also think it's hard to know the effect of something when you're right in it. Because of course there was the change from film to digital now 15 longer years ago, and that made more and more people able to work. And so I think this also will make it more possible to work and also make us be just like enough, enough, enough. So I don't know. I feel a little bit concerned. I also feel really grateful that I am not 24 years old now. I am very grateful that I was 24 years old in 1982 when it was, you could still make an impression. And one thing that has really struck me is what it's like for young filmmakers, because when we were young, the only way that somebody could see your work was if they came to the cinema. There wasn't even VHS. Then there was VHS at the beginning, but there was barely any VHS. And and now younger people I know, they put something on Vimeo, they put it on YouTube, they send it, in a file to their friends, and they don't have a shared experience of the film. And I mean, I do that also, but uh, I think it's so important to have it be an art form that people still share together in a room, um, even if we sometimes also watch things at home. And that has really made a difference. And I'm always saying to young filmmakers, just find a room and get everybody in the room and show your films, because just sending it to somebody, they'll never look at it. So yeah, I think we're losing that. And then COVID also had a big effect on that, right? Sitting in a dark room with a lot of people and all watching it and having very different experiences, while you're watching it, and then going out afterwards and talking about it. And yeah, yeah. People ask me very often why I make such personal work, why my work is always about things sort of in my world. Um, and I can't explain it. I think it's very hard for an artist to say why they do what they do. I mean, there are ways you can explain it. You could say, "Oh, I wanted to do such and such," but the deepest part of it is it's just who you are. It was, I don't know how I was raised, the climate I was raised in, that made me feel very strongly that this was the way to speak.